The Bible is a library. That's what Scripture professors tell us, based on the fact that it contains different types of literature. But we can also think of the Bible as a house full of characters: King David, Moses, Samson, Jeremiah, and so on. But among all these characters, a lot of the women have been silent. Of the 1,426 people given names in the Hebrew Scriptures, only 111 of them are female. The proportion is twice as great in the New Testament. There we meet Andrew, James, John, and Judas. But we meet the Samaritan woman, the Canaanite woman, the widow of Nain. This could be compared to news stories of today, telling us of the women of Tucson, the Milwaukee lady, or the wife of Harry. In a book entitled Hidden Women of the Gospels, some of these ladies are given names and stories. They clearly existed, as evidenced by the stories in which they are involved. But in this book, the author gives them a little more substance. This is by no means a feminist declaration. It's a peek at some of the other people affected by Jesus in ways we might not have thought. In last week's Gospel, we heard the story of the loaves and the fishes. This is from the Gospel of John, chapter 6. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Andrew spoke up, "Here is a boy and 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish." The Gospel says, "Here is a boy." His name might have been Ephraim. This boy had a mother. Her name might have been Raisa. This morning we focused on this mother, Raisa. "Don't forget your lunch," I called after the swirl of dust that was my son Ephraim. I thrust some fish and barley loaves into his grubby hands, then grabbed the baby in my basket. This trip wasn't my idea. I grumble all the way there. I didn't look forward to standing on the fringes of the hot, smelly crowd, feeling discounted and dull. For the umpteenth time, I followed Ephraim, a daredevil who would push his way forward while I fumbled with the fussy baby. What was the commotion up front? Around me, people were grumbling about the heat and their hunger. Was Ephraim safe? If I could find him, maybe we could escape this chaos. As I stood on my tiptoes peering toward the teacher, whom I couldn't even hear, my worst fears materialized. There stood scrawny Ephraim, grinning, handing over his miserable lunch to the teacher, Jesus. Before I had a chance to be embarrassed, neighbors recognized him and shoved me forward. Wanting only to rescue Ephraim, I ignored their rude jeers. But I was too late. The teacher had taken the food into his hands, touching it with extraordinary reverence. You'd have thought those loaves were gold and the fish scales delicate lace. I stopped in my tracks, my baby quieted. I couldn't hear the teacher's words, but the crowd started buzzing with news. Suddenly, the sun gleamed on the silvery cascade of fish and mounds of bread. That wasn't the only transformation. I know these people. On better days, we consider ourselves pond scum. We're uncombed and unwashed. In the heat, we reek. We can count on one hand the compliments we've heard. Not much beauty in our rugged ways. But this Jesus treated us like we were somebody. He and his friends served that meal as though we were dining at the palace in the cool shade of marble columns. And we responded. The laughter bubbled. Conversation swirled. Men who hadn't looked at their wives except in drunkenness bent over them with tender concern. People who normally treated their children as dogs were asking if they wanted seconds. Breaking the bread, we admired its texture and inhaled its fragrance. We who usually shoveled food down ate with delicacy and poise. Even the invalids were included, and they were never included. The other women and I added the little food we brought, and those who couldn't remember their last meal consumed a lavish banquet. We gathered the leftovers in a daze, filling our baskets. Some accountant types, those who'd seated us in rows, tried to count the men, but they'd missed the point. This rare grace didn't fit into a ledger sheet. For a moment there, our wretched scarcity blossomed into abundance. We forgot our grating poverty. Our ancestors would have said the desert blossomed. I lifted my chin a notch. I smoothed my hair. I felt pleased, because for that hour I had been the queenly hostess. After all, I packed that lunch for Ephraim.